following is a presentation of the Women's Football Alliance.
It's the middle of the season, and one thing is for sure. For some teams, it's going to be a fun ride on the road to Canton. Welcome to the Road to Canton. I'm your host, Brian Sweeney, the voice of the Women's Football Alliance Pro Division National Championship game. With me, as always, is Alex Wested. Alex, this past weekend, there were plenty of great games to watch and a few Division II teams that showed that they are ready to make the move to the Pro Division very, very soon. Let's look now at the Week 3 scores and highlights. The Alabama Fire welcomed the Atlanta Rage to Birmingham. Last season, when these teams met, it was the Fire that emerged victorious. This year, however, the Rage won the first meeting 21-6. They will meet again in 2 weeks. The St. Louis Slam put 41 points on the board for the second straight week. This time, however, the defense did not allow a point as they went on the road and shut out the Derby City Dynamite 41-0. The Nevada Storm got their first win of the season when they hosted the Wasatch Warriors, and in doing so, moved to 500 on the season with a 52-8 victory. And the Houston Energy was victorious on the road as they beat the Zydeco Spice 55-6. Alex, this week we have seen that there are Division II teams ready to compete at the Pro Division level. First, it was Baltimore over New York, and now Atlanta over Alabama. Which of these teams do you think has the best capabilities to move up to the Pro Division next season?
Well, I think we have to start with what I liked out of Baltimore. In terms of their body work that they've shown so far, they've had very good wins, they've had very good offenses, but the calling card for the Baltimore team has been their defense since they've joined the WFA. They've had strong defense against Division II, Division III teams. We just need to see it over the WFA Pro teams. We've seen it over the WFA Pro teams this year. They get a tough test coming up in DC. We'll see how they handle that DC offense historically, which has been great in terms of scoring points on the board. If they have a good showing there, where I think if they can score 20 points defensively, 15 points defensively, 10 points defensively, I think it's a good reason for optimism for Baltimore to be comfortable moving up to that next level. I have concerns about Atlanta right now. I think that when you look at the Atlanta Rage schedule, you've given up 6 points all season. 6 have come to Alabama, 0 have come to the Virginia Panthers. I think my big thing when I look at them, their schedule isn't as deep as it needs to be to get a true sense of where they are. You look at the rest of their schedule, they get Carolina twice, Alabama again at home in Atlanta, and then you're at Derby City, where I think that in terms of that measuring stick, we've talked about before the challenges that the Alabama Fire have this season in figuring out their depth. But we also talk about for Atlanta, you go and play Derby City, that's going to give us a chance to really figure out where you are. Derby City's been a Division II powerhouse for forever. And so if you want to go improve your worth, go beat Derby City, because you're going to go to Louisville, Kentucky. You're going to have to beat them there. Prove it to us. See what you can do.
Let's look at the first of the games of the week. The DC Divas moved to 500 on the season when they extinguished the Tampa Bay Inferno in our nation's capital 25-15. Alex, last week you sat right in that chair and told me that this game looked great on paper. Were you happy with the outcome for the Divas?
Well, I was happy with the outcome for DC, where you look at the rest of the DC schedule in terms of what they have moving forward. You look at what they have to be able to start picking up those wins somewhere down the road. You talk about going out and beating a team that's in your division, in your conference. Tampa Bay was exactly that. They needed to get a win against them, and they did. My concern and my surprise was the closeness of the game. We've seen a DC Divas team historically that scores a lot of points, that's able to move the ball up and down the field, and a Tampa Bay offense that, in terms of other teams, they have struggled to move the ball as well. This game was a lot closer than I thought it was going to be. I knew it was going to be a great game on paper, but I wasn't expecting this by any means. I think that when you look at the Tampa Bay defense, they did a great job. They stepped up. You hold one of the great offenses in the WFA in DC to a very limited number of points. That's a victory in the cap of Tampa Bay. And for DC, you have your games coming up against Boston. You have those games against a Minnesota where you're going to need to be able to score points in bunches. And in terms of that first measuring stick where you're taking on Tampa Bay, well, you got a couple of other significant measuring sticks coming up. Can you continue to score points at the rate that we're used to seeing DC score at? They're in a playoff spot right now if things began today, but I still need to see more out of this DC offense truly to make me believe in the DC Divas.
And in the second game of the week, the high-powered offense of Minnesota once again came to play when they welcomed the Dallas Elite Mustangs. Although Dallas had a good ground game, Minnesota stopped them when it mattered and went to 500 on the season with a 64-30 win. Alex, in just 2 games this season, we have seen the Minnesota Vixen put up over 100 points. In fact, of the 10 Pro Division teams that have played only 2 games, Minnesota leads the league with 104 points scored. Is this Minnesota's best offense since they joined the WFA?
You know, you look at that game, you look at the way that they played, and again, points scored is a great thing. It's not like these were garbage time points that Minnesota was scoring, too. It was, they had their way truly up and down the field with the Dallas defense the entire contest. You had 2 touchdowns that were taken away because of penalties for Minnesota in that contest, including what should have been a all-time franchise high 70-point touchdown in the late stages of the fourth quarter. It wasn't as though that Dallas was out of this game. Brian, you and I were there. I was on the broadcast for it for the Minnesota Vixen, where you look at that game at the half, it's a much closer game until the last minute and change. It's something another Minnesota sports team could say lately too as well. But you look at that, and then all of a sudden Minnesota takes advantage of 2 Dallas turnovers to seal the first half, get the momentum going in their favor. And there's a lot to like in this Minnesota offense. You and I talked after the game. There's questions to have about this Minnesota defense yet. You know, you give up 40 points to St. Louis. You give up 30 points here to Dallas. There's still question marks on their schedule where you get Iowa this week, then you get DC. You get teams that you know you should be able to come away with a victory against, but you still have to show it against the St. Louis. We've circled that game on paper in terms of their game that concludes the regular season in St. Louis. That's going to be their measuring stick for their opportunity for playoff success. Based on where they are now, they should be hosting in the opening round of the WFA playoffs. But the question becomes, so what? If they win that game, that's great. But if you can't go have a good showing against St. Louis in St. Louis, it might not matter. For Dallas, too, we've talked about, what do you see on paper from the Dallas Elite Mustangs? You see a lot of great things. Hernandez had a great game, I thought, an interception here. But all the interceptions, miscues for Dallas, they weren't really her fault. Drop balls, incomplete passes, things of that nature that were largely on the receiving core. And I think that when you look at this contest, it's not just that Minnesota's here to play. Dallas is here to play, too. The problem is, who do they play the rest of the way? They have to be able to get meaningful, significant victories the rest of the way for Dallas to continue to build on a team that is severely on the rise.
I would agree 100% with that. And in the third game of the week, the Mile High Blaze moved to 2-0 on the season with a big win against the Cali War, 43-28. Alex, last season the Blaze only had 1 win over a Pro Division team. So far this season, they are 2-0. Do the Blaze have what it takes to become the next American Conference powerhouse team?
Well, I think before we started recording this program today, Brian, the big question is not can they be a powerhouse, it's can they be consistent. You look at this game against Cali, and there's a couple of different things. One, first game truly against Cali all year. It's an opportunity for them to be able to show for both Cali and Mile High where they are. The number one thing that you look at with this game is the weather. And yeah, both teams have to play with the weather, but it was a stormy, wet, rainy day in Denver, Colorado. And so the question is, if you play this game in a vacuum in perfect weather condition, is the result the same? I remember going through the games in the scoreboard as we were doing the Minnesota Vixen broadcast and seeing that score line early on where Mile High was pitching a shutout against Cali. That was a surprise. We've known the Cali War for a number of years. We've known them even before when they were 2 separate teams that combined into one to represent the state rather than just Los Angeles. And the big thing that I see here is if this game is played again, can Cali put points on the board early? We know that this game is going to be played at some point because my guess, if Cali right now out of the playoff spot wants to be relevant, they're going to have to continue to build on into the back half of their season where they need to start winning by a lot based on the schedule that they have left. We talked last week about the challenges that Cali has in their schedule where they don't play enough Division I teams in the top flight because of where their location is. They play Nevada, they play Mile High, they played Minnesota a season ago, but they need to have a stronger schedule to have a chance because now you look at everybody else, whether it be in the central time zone or now scattered into the mountain time zone, those schedules are so much tougher and favor those teams in the Massey ratings that Cali's margin for error, formerly this big, is now much smaller because they need to get those wins and they need to get them by a big margin. Because we've talked about all season long, The American Conference is as close as it's going to be. And anytime you drop a game, home or on the road, that might be your season. And so for the Cali War, they have a lot of work that they have to do. They have a lot of talent, though, something that we're looking forward to see, but they need to turn their season around quick. For Mile High, it's a coming out party for them. I think that there's a lot to like in terms of what Mile High showed us, but again, how much of that was influenced by the weather? How much of that was just the defense being rock stars that we have known that they can be over the course of their time in the WFA? I'm curious to see what happens with each of these teams coming up, because I think for Cali and Mile High, this is one result, but in a 6-season game, you need to be able to show that consistently, because that season's over like that. And so we need to take a look at both these teams and say, what does this mean truly in the big picture? Because the season's going to be over before we know it. And both of these teams may look at this Week 3 game and say, that was the game that defined our season.
There's something going on in the football landscape, and hopefully Lois Cook can help us figure out what that is in her segment, Low on the Go.
Yoo-hoo! Now, I'm going to tell you something. I had to go and get a new head coach. I know you're sad, but my bones are not what they used to be. But she's good. She's going to be tough. She's going to get them straight. Oh, and I had to get a nice young whippersnapper. She's a blonde-headed thing. She's spicy. Y'all ready? All right, today is the first day of the rest. My bad. Of your life. On the line. Where's your clothes at?
I went to work today. I forgot it.
Oh, so you work hard, huh?
Yes.
Oh, so we gonna see if you work hard on this field.
I'm just.
I didn't ask you all that.
Well, hello, coaches. My name is Jasmine.
Your new name is Trigger J.
Okay. Nice to meet you.
Oh. Get them sunflowers. Yeah. What you looking at? Who you talking to? You better step down. All right. Who pissed in your cereal? You. What's your name?
Yo, they call me Firecracker.
Well, snap, crackle, and pop. In the Oompa Loompa?
Huh? Oompa Loompa.
Your name is Oompa Loompa. What in the bring it on is this? Go Clovers, go Clovers. I know them not sunflower seeds. So what they call you? Put me down!
Well, my name is Sandy, and I'm so excited to be here. Football is something I've always
Your name
wanted
is Tiny.
to... Okay. Go me.
What's up, shorty?
What in the LL Cool J is this?
FL, baby, what's up?
Stop that. Your name D Smooth.
Oh, man. Anywho, so we're going to get our first practice going in about 2 hours. But first, I want to go over the rules and regulations of the team. And if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand, and I will politely pretend that I don't see it, okay? So there will be no time off. There will be no birthdays, no holidays, no weddings, no funerals, no beauty pageants. See you soon, okay? Chop chop.
After this short break, we will look at the Week 4 matchups. Welcome back. Let's look at the Week 4 Pro Division matchups. The 2-0 Mile High Blaze look to climb in the Massey ratings when they travel to play the 2-0 OKC Lady Force of Division 2. This will be the first of 2 meetings this season. The 1-1 DC Divas host the 3-0 Baltimore Nighthawks of Division 2. DC has given up more points this season than they have scored, and Baltimore has not allowed a single point yet. The 0-2 Tampa Bay Inferno host the 3-0 Palm Beach Coyotes of Division 3. These 2 teams will meet again in 2 weeks. The 1-1 Minnesota Vixen will travel for the first time this season to face off against the 1-2 Iowa Phoenix. These teams last met on the opening weekend of 2022, with the Vixen coming out on top 55-0. Alabama is the only pro team this week on a bye. And in the pro versus pro games, the 2-1 Houston Energy host the 1-1 Dallas Elite Mustangs. These teams met once in 2023, with Houston punching the win 34-0. The 1-1 Cali War will host the 1-1 Nevada Storm. These teams will meet again later this season with playoff positioning on the line. Last season, Cali swept the series by a combined total of 95-28. Now let's look at the Week 4 Games of the Week. In a rematch of the 2023 National Championship, the 2-0 Boston Renegades are on the road to play the 3-0 St. Louis Slam. Boston has not lost a game since May 19, 2018, and St. Louis has not lost at home since the last time Boston made the trip to the Gateway to the West in 2022. Game time is set for 7 p.m. Central. Alex, both of these teams are scoring at will this season. Is this the first time we see both of these teams held to under 40 points?
I think it's possible, but I don't know how realistic it is. I think that when you look at this matchup, and again, we talk about last season on ESPN2, you, me, and Donna Wilkinson called that game on ESPN2, and it was such a great contest. It was a scoreless game after the first quarter, and I don't think anybody expected going into that was going to be the result. You expect Boston to do Boston things. The question was just, what is the capability of St. Louis against arguably the greatest women's tackle football team of all time? I mean, we've talked about for a long time just how dominant Boston has been. This has been their case. Their only threat of losing has been St. Louis. Since the COVID canceled year of 2020, no one has been in that same ballpark except for St. Louis. And I think that when you look at the game that was played in St. Louis, you mentioned the last time St. Louis lost at home, St. Louis was up at the half. And there's question marks for Boston where we're going to see who the Boston Renegades are. You look at the schedule for Boston so far, they've played games against 2 teams, Tampa and Alabama, that don't figure to have a significant role in that playoff conversation. Is one of them going to sneak in there? Probably, just because of the way that the National Conference is shaped up. But now you look at the rest of what Boston has. They're at St. Louis, home to New York, at Pittsburgh, home to DC. This is a gauntlet of a schedule that we haven't had to see Boston play, where we've had a legitimate question of, well, what can we see Boston do? Their 3-headed running back core is now down to 2, because when you look at what they have, Katie Falkowski is their leading rusher, Spring Gamble is their second. There's no Tuti Kusanen at this point anymore. Through 2 games, no stats recorded for her. And so when you take away that extra running back, that means that your depth has to be tested. Granted, Boston, they're beating everybody by so many points, they can test that depth regularly. And so we have an opportunity now where when they go against a A-flight team in St. Louis, we get to see what Boston's made of. Allison Cahill as well has yet to take a snap for the Boston Renegades. Let's look at both quarterbacks. Megan McFadden, Jacqueline Lane, both great quarterbacks. We've seen them play in relief time later on in games when games are out of hand for one team or the other. But now this is a game that matters, where you're traveling with St. Louis and you don't know what the consequence of that game is going to be. In terms of the Massey ratings, it's probably not going to have a massive impact. It's 1 versus 2. But for everybody else down the record, this is a game that Boston, you don't want to talk about a must-win game for the Boston Renegades. This might be it. Based on what they have and the questions that they have, certainly they've beaten the lower teams in WFA Pro, but this is an opportunity for Boston to say, nope, we're still here. We're still number 1, and they need to do so in dominating fashion against St. Louis. Can they? Of course. You and I have seen Boston enough now over the years to know that's very likely going to be the case. But this is a St. Louis team, too. And I talked with James Brown, owner of Minnesota. This is a St. Louis team that, in terms of my time in the WFA since 2019, your time now in your 10th year covering teams as part of the WFA with the Minnesota Vixen, this is arguably as consistent of a team as we've seen in that span. Much of the starting lineups on both offense and defense for St. Louis have been the same since you and I first started calling games together. There's no turnover here because they are good, they are dominant, and they know how to win football games. And so when you look at this head-to-head matchup, it's the most exciting matchup I think that we've had in Week 4 in quite some time in the WFA. You know, you talk about shootouts between Boston and DC. You talk about all these great offensive opportunities and performances, the great offenses that Arlington used to have back in the day. There's a lot to look at this game where you can say that this may define the tone of the rest of the WFA season. St. Louis, if they want to win, they got to keep Boston off the scoreboard. They have the defense to do that, especially too with not knowing the film for a couple of the key players that they had in Canton, Ohio last July. Boston, if they want to win, they got to prove, well, hey, you know what? We still got the best offense in the WFA and no one can stop us. It's not just that we played Alabama. It's not just that we played Tampa. It's that we have consistently enough on the passing, running, receiving, all of the above to still be able to beat teams significantly. Because this is a statement mark on the road for Boston. They haven't had one of these for quite some time, where this starts a tough stretch for them on the back half of the year. And this, I think, is exactly what the WFA wanted. You wanted games against top-flight competition in the middle of the season that had significance. This is exactly what we have going into this week, where all of a sudden these two teams might be playing again in Canton, Ohio. We don't know yet because there's a long time between now and June and July. But when you look at this, this could be a championship preview. And neither team is going to want to leave this one and say, well, we got to start over, because both of these teams know that there's the opportunity that they could see them again.
We'll be right back with a look at the second game of the week. Welcome back. And in the second game of the week, after a week off to lick their wounds, the 1-1 New York Wolves are on the road for the first time this season to take on the 2-0 Pittsburgh Passion. These teams last met in the playoffs of 2019, with the Passion coming out on top. Kickoff is at 6 p.m. Eastern. Alex, do you see New York rebounding from that loss? Or is this Pittsburgh Passion team the same team of years past?
Well, and it's tough, too, for New York to be able to sit there for the last 2 weeks and say, well, now what? I think that there were a lot of questions. You know, we talked about that game last week where Baltimore going on the road to New York and taking care of business, not just taking care of business, but shutting out New York. I think that there's a lot of question about New York, and New York wants to be able to prove, do the Wolves have enough to be able to be contenders? Or was the game against Baltimore something that's par for the course for them? You look at 2 games now where you have a tough game, a close competitive game against Detroit, and then you have this game against Baltimore. What version of the New York Wolves are we going to get? Because you look at their schedule the rest of the way in New York, this is closed caption just to you, your schedule gets hard. Right? It starts now. You have games at Pittsburgh, at Boston, at Baltimore, and then you have 1 home game left against DC. The margin for error for New York coming into the season, I think, was about here. Because I think after last year's game in Canton, Ohio, that we were on the call for, you had a good feeling about the New York Wolves, where they had a lot of momentum going into this season. But now, all that goes away with a May 4th loss to Baltimore, 41-0. And so when I look at this and I say, if you are the New York Wolves, you need a good result here. Maybe that's points on the board. Better for New York, that's a win. Because Pittsburgh, again, they too, as we've mentioned, have their question marks. You look at their schedule. They played an Alabama Fire team that has more questions than answers that we've seen now through 3 weeks. You see them play DC, where they were able to double up DC 54-29. And then you ask yourself the question, after 2 weeks, they're full strength, they're rested. Their back half of the schedule gets just as difficult. They get Tampa, Boston, and Columbus. Columbus, a good defensive team in Division II. And the question again just becomes this: who has come to play? Pittsburgh has the momentum. They're on the home court. They have the ability to come away with a victory here. But I think there's almost an air of mystique and aura about the New York Wolves, where they don't have any stats available online for us or anybody else. They don't have much to do about anything. They have some film, yes, they do. But beyond that, there's a lot of question marks about the New York Wolves, and that might be something that plays into their favor. Because if you look at the other teams right now, if you look at Pittsburgh, you can say, okay, Marcelina Chavez is your quarterback. She's throwing at 57.1% in terms of what she has. She's thrown 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Let's sit back in a zone. Let's try to make sure that we cover all the receivers the best we can. There's questions about the rushing game. Chavez is the second best rusher. Devon Peace is the leading rusher. for the Pittsburgh Passion, but only at 300 yards total in 2 games this season. And the receiving game, again, is a question. Meister, Malarkey, Meyer, Johnson, great depth, but certainly you're looking for that star. And if New York wants to be able to make a statement here, they can do so. They can do so with the win. They can do so with a great effort defensively against a Pittsburgh Passion team that has designs on being the 2nd seed in the National Conference for the 2nd straight year. Because guess what? Nobody else is stopping them, New York, except for you.
Alex and I would love to share your highlights and thoughts of the Division II and Division III matchups. If you have clips or any information you would like us to share, please send it to us at roadtocantonshow@gmail.com. We are at the halfway point of the 2024 season, and soon the playoff races will begin to come into focus. For Alex Wested and Lois Cook, I'm Brian Sweeney, and we'll see you next time on the Road to Canton.
Thank you for watching the preceding presentation from the Women's Football Alliance.